the ceasefire and now at an end. What has led to the failure to further extend that pause in hostilities?
I don't think there's ever been intent to further extend this. The only thing that made this was not some kind of a rapprochement between Israel and the genocidal terrorist organization Hamas. Hamas had taken hostages, including women and children. And for Israel, it was a priority to get the women and children, and especially the children, out. It seems that Israel has gotten, Hamas has traded most of the children that they have. There's a couple who they claim are dead, and we don't know if that's true. But that was the purpose of the ceasefire. Israel, paid heavily for that by releasing terrorists. And now Israel is resuming its original war objective of removing Hamas completely from power in the Gaza Strip.
I mean, you say that the prolongation of the ceasefire was never anticipated. The fact is, this was based on trust. We knew that for every 10 Israelis that were released, another day of ceasefire may well take place. Now, what happens to those people, those Israelis who are being held hostage? We think there's something like 145 still being held. We believe, as you said, 4 of them being under 18, 10 over the age of 75. Their lives hang in the balance now.
That's correct. But so long as Hamas is in power in the Gaza Strip, and so long as Hezbollah is in power in Lebanon, the lives of every Israeli hang in the balance. The leader of Hamas in Gaza, Sinwar, yesterday said that October 7th was just a dress rehearsal. That is to say, this was not a one-off thing. They didn't say, we're going to have one day of massacring, mutilating, torturing, and raping, and then we're done. They plan to do this to every Israeli they can get their hands on, and that is why Israel is making the very difficult choice of proceeding with the war despite the remaining hostages.
What does the next phase look like, Eugene? Because the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in Israel yesterday, and the US line now is notably tougher. They're uncomfortable with the scorched earth policy that took place in the north of Gaza. And they want to take a much more careful approach in the south. The south, of course, where more than 1 million Palestinians have fled to under Israeli orders, very, very densely populated. So is this next phase going to look different to what we've seen before?
I think it's probably going to look somewhat different because of the differences in the situation, as you mentioned. But at the same time, Israel fought in the north, completely in accordance with international law, only hitting military targets. Unfortunately, Hamas hides its military targets behind civilians. It's going to continue to do that. That does not immunize those targets from attack. And the line that Secretary Blinken was pushing on Israel yesterday, was basically, you can fight Hamas, of course you're justified, but you can't fight in a way that you can win. And that is not something that Israel can accept. Indeed, it is very crowded in the south. And indeed, the United States should be exerting diplomatic pressure to mitigate the effects of that. That pressure needs to be exerted on Egypt, because the reason it's so crowded in the south is because Egypt has closed its border and does not admit in a single refugee. Imagine the Syrian civil war, the US-NATO war in Afghanistan, the war in Ukraine. If 0 refugees can escape the conflict across the border. That's what makes this conflict so unique. And that is a policy of Hamas, which tries to shoot people who want to escape, and Egypt, which does not allow people across the border.
But can I just follow up from what Sarah said? Blinken has made it very clear, and he has toughened his line, saying that civilians need to be protected. They need to avoid displacement of civilians, as Sarah said, those 1 million, 1.5 million people who've headed south, and also avoid damaging critical infrastructure. This is a marked change from the United States rhetoric. The UK also has sent another warship, their HMS Diamond, to join HMS Lancaster. There is enormous pressure now from the international community about the next phase of this.
Yes, that's correct. Now, what does it mean not hitting infrastructure? Hamas puts, as we've seen, there's evidence now, Hamas puts its facilities in hospitals. Whatever the US says Israel's not allowed to bomb, of course, that's where Hamas is going to be. So what, Blinken said, if taken seriously, if this is really what the administration means rather than window dressing, is essentially a life preserver for Hamas. It is saying that this war and all the casualties on both sides will have been meaningless, and in the end, Hamas stays in power. That is not something Israel can accept. There's never been a war fought without hitting infrastructure or hitting legitimate military targets. Now, I think Secretary Biden is saying this largely for internal domestic policy reasons. There is a far-left progressive faction of the Democratic Party that has been unhappy with how with his support for Israel. But at the same time, he's between a rock and a hard place because the overwhelming number of Americans and even the overwhelming number of Democrats do support Israel in this. So this, I think, explains the zigging and the zagging, and that zigging and zagging is probably not done yet.
I mean, the infrastructure we're talking about specifically is hospitals, and we do know that Hamas have used hospitals as a base, but that hospitals, the United States and others, saying need to be protected no matter what. There is also a call for aid to continue to get through to the Gaza Strip. It was 200 plus trucks a day as part of the truce agreement. How much pressure is Israel under to keep allowing that, and how feasible is it?
No, I think not hitting infrastructure and allowing aid in are different. Not hitting infrastructure is creating safe havens for Hamas. It is creating bases where they can operate from with impunity and guaranteeing their survival. Aid is a different matter, and I would distinguish those issues. But we know, why does Hamas hide in hospitals? Because international law gives them a special protected status, which they lose when they're used for military purposes. Now, if Secretary Blinken is saying you cannot hit hospitals or anything else, even if Hamas is hiding there, even if you warn the people, as Israel did, Israel has not operated against hospitals simply by dropping bombs on them, right? As the United States did in Mosul. Israel warns the people, gives them weeks to evacuate, and then moves in, giving a huge advantage to Hamas. But if Israel cannot attack Hamas targets at all, it is basically a recipe for Israel living permanently next to a genocidal regime. I don't think Israel is going to make that call.